Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on Indian writing in English translation, today we are going to talk on humanism in modern Indian writing. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is a retired professor of English, but every time we meet him, every time we get lots and lots of information through him, we are enlightened by his knowledge, and the knowledge gives us the better path to move on. So friends, let's welcome our guest Professor Anand Prakash, and let's try to grab maximum knowledge through him on today's topic, that is humanism in modern Indian writing. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you Geetika for your kind words, and welcome viewers. Today's topic, as has been announced, is humanism and modern Indian writing, and every word in this title is to be taken almost literally, in the sense that I'll be talking about humanism, and the time is modern. By modern I mean the 20th century and the first 2 decades of the 21st century. All that is modern, and Indian writing in English translation, which is the series. Therefore I'll be referring to the texts and the authors who wrote originally in an Indian language, but then that literature was made available by the translator into English. Humanism is a very popular subject for us, and it has a history. It did not drop from heaven all of a sudden. There were social developments in Europe, in the rest of the world, and those developments led to the first birth of humanism and then the evolution of humanism, as history went ahead with developments that happened in it. When is the birth of humanism? I'm just having a brief look at it so that we can relate it to modern Indian writing. Humanism is born, if I can use that word, sometime in the second millennium, maybe 14th century, 15th century, and the voices of humanism, the urges of humanism, they were felt, they were heard in writing that was literary mainly, and we have already discussed, for instance, the poetry, the writing of Chaucer, the writing of Thomas More, later Shakespeare, Milton, so far as English writing is concerned. And in India, we have a sort of humanism in the Bhakti period, that period when human beings started relating God to us. So when God was there, when we were there, then focus gradually shifted from God to the human in the second millennium. Let's say in the 15th and 16th centuries, in the poetry that is ascribed to Kabir, that is given to Guru Nanak, to Mirabai, and to other Bhakti poets. These people, were talking about God all the time, but then the person who was relating oneself to God was a human being, and this human being was aware of the faults, the flaws in one's own character, in one's own approach, and the attitude that one would therefore adopt towards the world around himself or herself. So let's say that humanism was born then, and then the human being becomes the subject of discussion, subject of representation. Human feelings, human emotions, human attitudes, human thoughts, they get more and more expressed in literature. So that's how humanism comes forward, and it goes on without any break till the 20th century, when we start hearing the first voices of non-humanism, or sometimes anti-humanism in the 20th century. I'll not refer to that because that particular thing happened not in India, and we are talking about India. That happened in the capitalist Europe, where they started saying that humanity has not led us anywhere. Humanism has not led us anywhere. In fact, there's a kind of stalemate, there's a kind of deadlock in the 20th century, said the modernist poets of the 20th century England and Europe, and therefore one should start questioning humanism. So there is a kind of questioning of humanism also in the 20th century, but that is confined to, restricted to Europe, and Europe which calls itself developed. But anyway, humanism for us in the 20th century has taken a specific form, and that is our topic today. What that form is and how it has played the role of changing minds and affecting and influencing society is our interest and concern today. Indian writing, as I have already explained, writing that is restricted to the Indian languages in India, and India in the 20th century and the 21st century is deliberately, consciously taking up the cause of humanism. We describe ourselves as human beings. We describe ourselves as rational people, as people who think, as people who feel, as people who relate to others, as people who are individuals, but at the same time they are also a part of a system, a society, a social group, a region belonging to a language, and other connected things. So these human beings in the 20th century, in the form of writers, as members of groups of writers, talk more and more about the human condition, about the pressures on humanity, and also the capability of human beings to not just react, but also to hit back, also to critique what ails them, what makes them suffer. So they get back to it. They start understanding it. They start analyzing it. They start assessing it, and finally they are able to formulate their responses, and those responses are appropriate. So this happened in the 20th century, and this is our concern. 20th century for us, for India, is a century of humanism, so far as literature is concerned. Now, when I say this, I realize that there have been in India a large number of traditions and concepts which were not humanistic in nature. They were a bit too traditional in the 17th century, 18th century. There were systems in India, which would not give much credence to the human feeling, and there would be always a kind of mysterious force, a force that is outside us, a force that is above us, a force that is guiding us. And there were principles which were moral in nature. Not that one is supposed to be against morals. In fact, humanism always protects and preserves morals, and raises the level of morality still further. But then human beings are guided by their own urges, aspirations, and their ideals, and these ideals are as much human as they would be source from somewhere else, and that somewhere else also is a source which is human imagination, human thought. And therefore the 20th century writers, 20th century poets and philosophers and thinkers, critics, novelists, they talk about humanism directly or indirectly. And I'll go further than this in order to explain the other features of humanism in the 20th century. But then let me take a few examples now of humanist writing in India. And I'm consciously selecting writers who have not been covered in this series, because the series was, so far as the expanse and scope of the subject was concerned, was too large for any number of lectures. If there were 30 lectures, there were 40 lectures, then those would be not enough to cover such a vast area, and to cover the cultural landscape of such a big country as India. So I thought that in this lecture I will be referring to those writers who have not been taken up in detail from India, and these writers were no less than those who were taken up, but there were constraints of time and scope. So I refer to these writers today. For instance, there is a writer in Bengal in the 20th century, and he is Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay. And this writer was not covered, but because we thought that we would be covering him under the discussion of trends where he was mentioned. But then this person was there in the early 20th century. He was a contemporary of Tagore, a junior to Tagore, but then he wrote fiction, and he created characters which other writers had not dealt with in as much detail as he did. He was basically a novelist and he was known for his sympathy for women characters and for heroism in human beings, these two things. So please keep this in mind, that this person, this great writer, talks about women, and he talks about women not with just respect. He knows that they have deeper aspects of experience. They are more kind, and they are more heroic, they are more courageous, and therefore the more courageous they are, the more they outshine their men counterparts. He talks about men, he shows men who are kind to the world around them, including women. But then when it comes to women, then he becomes sentimental. He says that these people have remained untouched by the supposed corruption of the times, and women that we have become much more heroic than men of the time. And he is in the early 20th century is talking about certain issues which were beyond the ken of, beyond the knowledge of many other writers of his time. For instance, there is a novel by him called Path Ke Davedar. It's the people who laid claim to the right path, the correct path, and in Bangla it is Pathir Davi. And imagine the title. Just look at the meaning of the title. He's talking about path. He's talking about path. He's talking about a track. He's talking about a way to something else. And this way is the way of change. He prefers change to stagnation. And he is then, because he is talking about change, he'll be taking characters who will be courageous, who will be inspired, who will be self-abnegating, who will be thinking more of other things than their own narrow self-interests. And he's creating these characters so very well in a novel like Pathir Davi. And he also has a novel called Shrikant, which is revolving around the character of Shrikant. And that novel talks about the evolution of this young man. So he's a young boy initially, but he imagines, he dreams. He looks the world as some kind of manifestation of an ideal, and he's pursuing that ideal. But he's a great learner. He makes mistakes, and then he corrects those mistakes. So if you make mistakes, which is human, to err is human, then he also sees the problems that are reflected in the mistakes that he commits, and therefore he finally grows out. He finally corrects those mistakes. He becomes a better human being. Then he comes in touch with women, and those women are supposed to be fallen women. Fallen women, those who have been rejected by society on the consideration of morality. He talks about women who have no family, who sell their bodies and but who don't sell their soul, who don't sell their mind. They are very kind people, but because society has not looked after their education, looked after their upkeep, and they are poor, and they have shifted to the cities, and there they sell themselves. They are prostitutes. Therefore, people start looking at them with not just criticism but with hatred. And Sharat Chandra is a writer who sees in this supposedly fallen woman a kind of humanity, a kind of kindness that he doesn't see in others. So initially he talks about these fallen women, then he gives them sympathy, and he then relates that sympathy with a critical look at the structure of the society at that time. This is the structure of the family, the structure of marriage, the structure of the neighborhood, the culture there. And that neighborhood, those married people in the institution, the family, these people don't have that kind of humanism. Isn't it strange then, viewers, that people who are married, people who are in the family, people who are supposed to be following the path of morality, these people look down upon these fallen women. So what kind of sympathy would they have for a person who is deprived? So at one level, this writer Sharat Chandra is giving his affection, sympathy and regard to the supposedly fallen women. On the other side, he also offers a critique of those who don't belong to the category of fallen, but then who hate these women, who call them wrong, who call them bad, who ask Shrikant and other characters not to mix with them, not to talk to them, not to have to do anything with them. So imagine that a person who is not inside marriage is a person who is very humane, very kind, very considerate. And on the other side, there is a married person, particularly a male, who will himself be married, but then he will look down upon these women. And then the hypocrisy. What is the hypocrisy? This male will visit the places which are supposed to be infamous, the red light areas. He would go there. He will do all kinds of things there. He will misuse his money in order to get that kind of temporary comfort in the company of a woman who is compelled to sell her body. So imagine this person, when he comes out, and his associates and those with whom he moves around, those people hate these women. So you indulge in any kind of supposedly moral or immoral activity at that point of time, and then then they have the gumption to come out and say that they are fallen women. So this hypocrisy of society, this hypocrisy of the people who have accepted the institutions of the family, of marriage, of society, of culture, that hypocrisy also comes in for a very sharp comment at the hands of Sharat Chandra. He also has another novel called Charitraheen. Roughly this is characterless, without a character. And Charitraheen in its linguistic connotations is a person who is himself fallen. And it's a big novel like Shrikant, and there also this question of wrong and right, the question of sin and virtue, that is shown throughout. And Sharat Chandra is showing sympathy, understanding, and an awareness, a critical awareness of the people who hide behind or who reflect or who are identified by the idea of charitraheenta, that is characterlessness, without a character. So let me also tell you, friends, that characterheen in English, if translated as characterless, charitraheen in English is translated as characterless, then one connotation is missing in that, and that connotation is that the person is immoral. But what actually in English it might also mean is that the person doesn't have a character, doesn't have a specific feature, and the person is actually always bound by the principles that are adopted and evolved by others. So there is a difference in the translation of the word, but so far as Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay is concerned, Charitraheen is the person who is given to evil ways. So that way, this writer in Shrikant, in Charitraheen, in Shesh Prashna, in Pather Davi, he's critiquing the supposed virtues of society. At the same time, he sees virtue where virtue is supposed to be missing, and he is also showing the path of progress, path of courage, path of sacrifice. So imagine such a writer writing in Bangla in the early years of the 20th century is able to enthuse not just a limited number of readers, but whole generations. And in fact, if in Bengal one sees the acceptance of the strong, free woman of freedom, woman of enlightenment, then a lot of credit for that goes to Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay and people like him. How is this humanistic? I believe that this is very high humanism, because Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay is showing human beings as reconsidering questions of morality and taking courage in both the hands and following the path of truth. Even if that there are dangers on the way and people feel all the time threatened, even then there will be courage there. And in Pather Davi, to which I made a reference in the beginning, has a woman character, Bharati, and this character is revolutionary, which means that Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay in the early years of the 20th century He was there till the 1930s and also perhaps in the 40s. And this writer was reflecting through his novels the penchant for heroism, the penchant for courage, and he was inspiring young people to take to the cause of pursuing the truth and changing the world. Now you have in Punjab, you have a novelist called Nanak Singh. He is there in the 1930s and 40s. He takes social issues, he reinterprets history, he reinterprets politics. He talks about the village, he talks about the small town, he talks about strong characters, he talks about the peasantry. And if somebody is taking the cause of the peasantry in the 1930s and 40s, then this person has some kind of an intellectual association with Premchand, with writers of that kind, who thought that India lived in the villages. Gandhiji himself, referred to India as a place of villages. And Nanak Singh would be writing one novel after another. Chitta Lahu is a novel by him, and there he talks about reinterpreting what he calls lahu, blood, and blood has a large number of connotations. And blood means power, blood means also sacrifice, and blood is generally red, but this person is calling Chitta Lahu, and he goes into the question of purity, impurity, change, courage, all those things, and therefore one can say that Nanak Singh is an intellectual literary force to reckon with in the same period in which Tagore lived, Sarath Chattopadhyay lived, Premchand lived, and other writers of the century lived. Then you have Amrita Pritam, a poet, a woman from Punjab, and writing about freedom. Arguably, she is one of the first feminist voices in the 20th century. And if somebody is a feminist in the 20th century, then one is really a person of courage and fearlessness. It's very difficult for a North Indian woman in the early 19th century, early 1920s, 30s, and later Amrita Pritam was there till the other day. In the 1980s, I believe, she died. I don't have the exact year in mind at the moment because I'm talking on the basis of memory. And I believe that this woman who raised her head as a fearless woman, as a woman of courage, was there in the 1940s, 50s as a great presence. And she got translated. She wrote poetry mainly, but she also wrote fiction. And what is more important for us in this context is that as a woman, she wrote her autobiography. And in fact, most of her poetry and her fiction is autobiographical in nature, where she is at the center. And it's really a question of accepting the challenge that we have a writer in Punjab after Nanak Singh, a woman who accepts the supposed blame of being wrong. And she says, okay, I am wrong and do whatever you want, but I am wrong because of this reason. And in fact, I think that what you call wrong is what I call right. So this kind of a courage in a woman, and one of the first women poets in Punjab of that caliber. And she lived a life of freedom in her own way. She looked at relationships from the angle of modernity, from the angle of criticism of the value system prevailing in India, and she defined her own morality, she defined her own stance, and she lived the life of a writer. And you can live the life of a citizen, you can live the life of a mother, of a father, in the larger context, you can live the life of a teacher, but living the life of a woman who is driven by ideas and urges at the same time, and who does not denigrate urges, the passions. And she is a woman of passion, and she uses that passion very creatively in her writing to make a statement about the society in which she lives. So she'll criticize the established social relations, and she'll cast an accusing finger at the mores, the norms, the principles of behavior. And for that reason, one can say that this is the kind of humanism which has a feminist edge. So we will be covering this kind of humanism that shows the assertion of the individual as a person who has a mind, who has a body, who has structures, and who has the power to, and who has the gumption to, who has the courage to, fight back in order to either correct the structure or to completely destroy them and change them. So this kind of a courage is there in some writers that I talked about. I'll give you more examples of such writing in the second part of the lecture. And till then, thank you.
Now we would like to thank Professor Anand Prakash for giving us this productive session, and friends, we believe that you might have gathered lots and lots of information, and many more is going to be delivered to you soon. So you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break. Thank you once again. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on humanism in modern Indian writing, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is an eminent professor of English, and we believe that you might have gathered lots of knowledge and information through our previous session. So here we are to give you more. Let's welcome our guest Professor Anand Prakash once again. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you. And in the first part of the lecture, viewers, we have discussed three important authors of the 20th century, not in some detail, but with a reference, and that reference helped us, get the meaning of humanism in the modern period as it manifested in the Indian writing. I referred to three authors, Satyam Chattopadhyay, I referred to Nanak Singh, and I referred to Amrita Pritam. The first was a Bangla writer, the other two were writers from Punjab, and Nanak Singh, a male, and Amrita Pritam, a female. They have their own preferences, they have their own, they pick up independently their own topics and aspects for depiction in their writing, and they do so because they feel like doing so. They feel like telling people that this is their preference, and they tell with a sense of responsibility why they have picked up certain trends in life, in society, or in literature. So after we have had a look at these writers in the 20th century, all not talking about the self as much as about the society in which they live. And even if that self is important, as I made clear, in the context of Amrita Pritam, that self starts symbolizing the womanhood of India, and that woman who is born and brought up in the middle class surroundings, but who has sympathy for not just the women folk, but also for the other people in society. So we have these three authors already, and all of them are humanists at the core. They are humanists because they believe in the truth and the felicity that is possible in human life, in human emotions. Then we have writers from Punjab, but writing not in Punjabi, writing in other languages in Punjab. Like Punjab had produced a large number of Urdu writers. So we have Sahir Ludhianvi with us. Sahir Ludhianvi is a known name in India of the same period as the other writers that they considered. He was a lyric writer. He was a poet. He also wrote long poems, and he wrote the poetry of protest and love. And friends, particularly in the 20th century, people have been, bitten by this bug, whether one should be personal or one should be social. And the idea of being personal is the idea of expressing personal feelings. You have it in Amrita Pritam, the example is already there. You have it in Faiz Ahmad Faiz, whom we have discussed in other lectures, so I will not refer to him much. And the same thing is there in Sahir Ludhianvi too. He talks about love, he talks about sacrifice, he talks about emotions. But at the same time, those emotions and that sacrifice, they finally turn into a kind of an attitude which is critical of society. So he's sometimes very angry. He can talk about Taj Mahal, and Taj Mahal is the symbol of love. But Taj Mahal also is constructed by people who worked hard, and money went into all this. So he is able to combine, this thing with that, the personal with the social, and then he raises issues. And the issues are the issues of protest. They are not the issues of acceptance. You can't accept things as they are. You must, as a writer, look at the things around you with a kind of critical awareness, a critical sense that they are right and they are wrong. If they are right, then you have to explain, you have to show through your response how they are right, how they appeal to us. And if you find that the appeal is not forthcoming in general, then you have to give reasons as to why that is not happening. So in either case, the person is talking about the human acceptance and rejection of certain things that one is faced with. And Sahir Ludhianvi is known for his passion, and he is also known for his beautiful use of language. Now, using language not to preach, using language not to assert, using language to express, using language to go into the nuances of feeling. So there is a nuance of language, there is also a nuance of feeling. It's very difficult to capture a feeling. The feeling may have your own feeling, your friend's feeling, your enemy's feeling, your appreciation of people around you. All those things are there. So how to express that feeling? So that it becomes a kind of a question also. So if you have to learn the twists of language, if you have to if you have to know see the forms of feeling, then you should read Sahir Ludhianvi, a poet par excellence, and he was used extensively by the film industry in India. Some of the finest films that Bollywood in the 1950s and 60s made used Sahir Ludhianvi's songs. Pyasa is one example, where the great songs, Kagaz Ke Phool another example, and there the great Guru Dutt, the writer, is using this person Sahir Ludhianvi as a lyric writer. Now, one very interesting thing about Sahir Ludhianvi is that he's also an example of an integrated composite culture. So because he is Sahir, because he is a Muslim gentleman, because he has a kind of an ethos, it doesn't mean that he is blind to or he is ignorant of the writing of people other than Urdu. No, he knows Hindi very well, he knows Punjabi very well, and he can also compose things in Hindi as beautifully as he can compose in Urdu. And just see that the man from Punjab writing in Urdu but also writing in Hindi, and some of his bhajans which are also used in films are really remarkable. You can't, in fact, so far as the emotion of the bhajan is concerned, you can't separate him from the great bhakti poets of the past, of the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. And then, Dukhi Man Mera and all those famous bhajans, are by him. So imagine that this kind of a poet was with us. He was a poet of love. He was a poet of social criticism. He was a poet of sweetness. He was a poet of, as I said, the language which had lots of nuances in it. And he was a master of meter. The way he could, use the meter in order to express an emotion was really remarkable. It's not very many people who can use meter the way he can. He has that felicity with expression. So he can just give a twist, just give a mode and make something new out of it. And finally, he's a great communicator. You hear his ghazals, you hear his poems, sung as well as recited, and you know that you have become finally a different kind of human being with a changed perception about life. This is what's Sahir for us. And how does he get this kind of changed perception? Because he is looking at the concrete atmosphere around himself. He knows the people whom he is going to appreciate or criticize. And when love is there, then he would not bother about the boundaries of morality in the sense we accept the term, because morality sometimes can be very violent. It can be sometimes very cruel, and it denies a person the right to be human. So in that case, think of Sahir. Sahir will tell you how to appreciate a lover, how to appreciate a human being, how to appreciate a woman, and how to really see how a woman expresses her anger, her frustration, her annoyance, her joy. All these things, if one is to learn, one should read Sahir, his poetry, and one then will be that famous thing, that famous poem Parchaiyan, which part of which is sung by Lata Mangeshkar, is a remarkable poem. It's a long poem. And in that poem, the kind of changes he is able to make and capture in the emotion of people, not merely of North India, but the rest of the world, rest of the country. So that way you see that this person is a great experimenter. He is a great improver. He is a great interpreter in poetry of emotions as subtle as love and liking. Then we have 2 or 3 women poets in the 20th century, all outstanding. One has Krishna Sobhuti. She is still around, and she is a strong presence in Indian writing today. And she was a contemporary. She was in touch with people like Sahir, people like Amrita Pritam, and she wrote in her own style. And today also she is known for her Punjabiyat, the tough Punjabi woman, and writing in Hindi, but that Hindi has the flavor of Punjabi. So you read her Hindi and then you realize that she is perhaps a Punjabi writer. And if one goes and talks to her, she is quite senior now in age. She must be in her 90s. So she would tell you that she is a Pathan. And when she says Pathan, she has a very fine kind of smile on her face, that she is a woman of courage. She doesn't just bother about the ordinary people, who are so very moralistic, so very judgmental, and she can hit back. So that kind of, we require these people in today's world. These people who will speak the truth with courage. And Krishna Sobhuti is one who speaks the truth with courage. She's a fiction writer basically, and she also, very few people know that she also wrote under pseudonym, and there she wrote critical prose too. I've had the good fortune of meeting her, talking to her, and I know that, and she told me herself that as a writer, once she was asked to write a column, and that column was to be a critical, humorous column, and nobody knew that she was writing this column herself, and the name, the pseudonym used for this column was Arthur. And I said, oh, really, I've been reading Arthur, but I didn't know that Krishna Sobhuti was writing it. So a person can assume a personality, a person can assume a role, a person can then change the style of one's writing. A fiction writer talks like a thinker. So you write fiction, you write narratives, you characterize people, you tell their stories, you tell their dialogues. At the same time, you talk in your own voice also. And a voice that people don't like to hear easily. They can't accept easily, but she's not an easy writer in that sense, that she's not pliable. She's that way, not compromising. So she follows the path of truth. And when Krishna Sopti speaks or spoke in her prime, now she is not able to write as much perhaps, she is quite active, but then we have Krishna Sopti writing from 1950s onwards. And she is known for her women characters. There is a famous story written by her, Mitro Marjani, and it's a Punjabi woman, and she lives in a small town, and she has a giant family behind her back, and in that giant family, she is the voice of freedom, she is the voice of assertion. So this kind of a writer. She also wrote another short story which became a talk of the town. It is called A Ladki, and she was picking up another woman and her mother, and the two talk with each other, and this becomes a very different kind of a novel, very subtle in its presentation. Then she wrote another novel, and it became famous for, to say within quotes the wrong reasons, for its tough language, and it was called Yaron Ke Yar. So she has this kind of a writing, this kind of a stance, which people raise their eyebrows, and when they look at it, and Krishna Sopti can do that kind of a writing. So if in today's world, cultural world, one has to see the voice of rejection of the wrong things, then one has to look towards Krishna Sopti to give expression to that kind of a stance. Then you have the great Mahadevi Verma in Hindi, a writer of the 1940s, 50s, and she had wonderful prose also to write. She was basically a poet, and she is called the modern Meera. And she expressed, the emotions of women, of the woman, who would be sacrificing, but who is very sentimental, and who also, talks about felicity, about bliss, about freedom, about boy, about beauty and joy. And when these things are there, then Mahadevi Verma is the person to look for inspiration and guidance. So we have Mahadevi Verma with us, and she also wrote, prose. She wrote character sketches, and she had, that idea of the modern woman all the time hidden behind her verses as well as her prose writings and sketches, the word pictures that she was able to give. And she was the associate of Gandhiji. She was read by a large number of women readers all across the country. She is available in translation, and Mahadevi Verma is the name that gives us the idea about the sensitive woman, the courageous woman, and she had a mission to perform, a mission to carry on, and her mission was to spread education among women, and for that she established a Vidyapith of her own. So imagine a writer is not merely composing poems or writing articles or giving lectures, but also running an institute, and for that she would give all her life. So that kind of a life, life of sacrifice. I think she was a great campaigner. She was a person, who was doing a kind of, a campaign to spread education, to spread awareness, and to instill confidence in the women to come out into the open and talk in their own voice. This is Mahadevi Verma for us. She got the Jnanpith Award, and the kind of sterling quality she has as a writer, as a thinker, and as a fearless person is there for us to look up to and inculcate in us. We have Majaz. He died early. He died in his 40s, but his poetry is revolutionary, and he belongs to the the category of Faiz Ahmad Faiz and even Sahir Ludhianvi, and he would always imagine the woman as a part of the national movement, and he would imagine a woman to be shouting slogans on the street. And he's talking to a woman at one place that, you are covering your head with a pallu, but why don't you make a flag out of it? She says it very clearly कि ये पल्लू खूब था, लेकिन इसका परचम बना लेती तो अच्छा था. This also, this also later on became a part of a song in a film. But then this, is there from Majaz for us, writing once again something that will excite the imagination of people, something that will give new aspirations to people to come forward and take courage in both the hands, and then go against the wrongs in one's own style. This is Majaz for us. And we have till the other day we had this writer from Bengal, Mahashweta Devi, and she had certain films made on her novels, short fiction, and she was the one of the very few in India in the 20th century to take up the cause of Adivasis, to take up the cause of tribals. And she in fact reinterpreted some of the folk tales of India and then the folk characters of India, characters who had caught the folk imagination of people. Everybody has heard about Mahabharata, has read Mahabharata also, has seen films based on Mahabharata episodes. But then when you read Mahashweta Devi, then you have a different angle on the characters of Mahabharata. And she can make, Draupadi also look critically assessed rather than being shown as a heroine. And Draupadi can be the voice of certain sections in the society, but there are other women who are hidden somewhere away from Draupadi, and they might be as good or as strong as Draupadi herself. So that's a famous story by her. So we have Mahashweta Devi. Her angle is totally different. These days she is a darling of, she's a popular person with the subalternists, those people who think that civilization is not merely capitalism. Civilization is not merely progress that glitters. Civilization is not merely that shows progress on the surface. Civilization also is that which is hidden behind in the forests, where there is a kind of illiteracy, but illiteracy only in the modern sense. People can be illiterate and they can know more than us. There is a tribal who has not got any education in the field of arts, and he can create a wonderful work of art. So this person, this writer, talks about these tribals who live in the forests, who have their own codes, who have their own language, who have their own culture, and they never came to the cities and they never went to the schools, but then they lived a life of their own. They have their own interpretation of stars, they have their own interpretation of the sky, they have their own interpretation of the rain. And when they talk about rain, when they talk about a tree, when they talk about a flower, the way they can relate to the flower, the tree, the sky, the rain, etc., that thing we can't do at all. So who is right? The person who is a rational one, who has the modern education, who is enlightened, or the person who didn't have all these things but who lived in the company of nature, who followed one's own urges hidden within oneself, who was able to relate to a god, to a god which is there in a sparrow, to a god that is there in a crow, directly, personally. This kind of an imagination which is there in the tribals, that imagination is not there in the people who live in the cities. So Mahashweta Devi can, even though she is a Bengali woman from the upper class, she can relate so very well to the people in the tribals, in the Adivasis, people who live in the villages, who live in the forests, and who have not got that kind of education that we call education today. So we have Mahashweta Devi, and widely translated into different languages, including English, and in Europe she has made a name for herself as a writer, and she is able to give toughness to characters, and toughness at the intellectual level, not tough in the physical sense, tough in the sense that the characters in Mahashweta Devi's writings, they can learn from their own experience, even if that experience for us is something strange and odd. So she can rationalize, she can put a whole argument in the middle of the experience that she picks up, and she can make it look like the predominant inspiring phenomena with us. Then you have what about some political leaders being writers? it's very difficult to have, to imagine that, people who are all the time busy in politics, they can also write. But there are examples. And one example with us is from Gujarat, and that is of Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi, K.M. Munshi. And K.M. Munshi was a activist, was a political leader, and he was anti-imperialist in his nature, and he fought in the freedom struggle. And he was there in one or two different parties at different points of time, but his job also was that of a writer. So he is a historical novelist, and in India, the writing of historical fiction is not exactly a popular phenomenon. But so when you think of K.M. Munshi, then you think of the mythical characters, the historical characters as appearing in the novel in the form of fiction. So we have this fiction writer from Gujarat. He was a close associate of the Gandhian movement. He was a follower of Gandhiji, and he wrote his novels also to trace the different cultural trends that were there in India even in the medieval period and earlier. So he picked up those characters, he put them, and from the second millennium, he would talk about the 12th century, 13th century, and he would make those characters alive before us through his imagination. So this is K.M. Munshi for us. He also gave a large amount of his time to education, to scholarship, to research, and of course he was a writer of novels. Then of course in Hindi we have people who largely gave themselves to journalism, but then they were also writers. As journalists also they were writers. Journalism in the early 20th century, as it would be in pursuit of creating a sense of protest against the Britishers in the early part of the 20th century, that journalism is not the journalism today. Today journalism is just to give some facts, to give some information, to go around places, collect bits and pieces of a story, and then present it in the popular idiom for the daily, for the weekly, or for the monthly. But in the early 20th century, being a journalist and being a literary journalist and using literature in order to promote the cause of education, promote the cause of political thought, philosophical thought, that wasn't easy. Wasn't easy intellectually. You had to really work very hard in order to think of all these things and then combine them into a kind of unified entity. And secondly, if you did that, then there was a chance that the powers that be, the imperialist regime, the Britishers would not be happy with you, because they didn't like Indians taking to rationality, taking to analysis, and taking to a critical thinking. And we have this I don't call him Patrakar, he was a Sampadak, he was an editor, but he was also a writer, that is Mahavir Prasad Dwivedi. He was there in the 1910 onwards, and he was the editor of Saraswati, that famous magazine then, and he was a poet, and he was a great translator, and he was also some kind of a novelist. He never published his novels, but there are stories that he wrote. There is information that he wrote or tried his hand at fiction writing, and he would talk. He would give long economic pieces, economic analyses in the form of articles, and that he would not himself write as much as he would create writers. So he created writers, he inspired writers, he picked up young people, encouraged them. If they sent their stories to him for publication in his magazine, if they sent their poems, then he would sit on those poems. He would work on those poems. He would change, and then he would publish them. And later on, these writers would be picked up for their writing in other journals, at other places too. So he gave all his life to this kind of literary journalism, but then that was not journalism, that was the world of thought, and he was a molder of opinion in the early part of the 20th century. And why did he do it? Because that was the need of the hour. At that point of time, people required ideas, thoughts. The Indian society required writers, and there were no writers. There was very little education in the early part of the 20th century. So how many writers could be produced that way? So Mahavir Prasad Dwivedi would then inspire people to read and then to write, and then he would help them to publish. Now there is a long list of people then at that time, and all of them were talking about the society and its branches of knowledge, its institutions, and all of them for that reason could have some kind of a character, what I describe as humanism. The other people that I just want to mention at the end of this discussion are people like Aurobindo Ghosh, a great writer, a great visionary, a person who would have the epic kind of imagination in him, and who can see ahead 50 years later, 100 years later, he'll come back. So he has that kind of cosmic imagination, and he has the philosophical bent of mind. So these writers, and he's an extension of, and he's the next category of writers such as Tagore. So Aurobindo Ghosh is there as a writer, as a great poet. Then you have later than that, after these giants, you have Tara Shankar Bandyopadhyay, you have Bimal Mitra. So the list is long. There is Muhammad Bashir in Malayalam, and there is Subramanya Bharati in Tamil. They are great writers. All of them belong to the 20th century. And these writers were both social in their imagination as well as political. Political because being social at that point of time, being a writer at that time, being a person of thought at that time, being a person of feelings at that time was a kind of political act. So I conclude by saying, I just pose two questions for you to ponder over. Not that one has to give answer to everything that is raised here, but then think about these questions. Can humanism and politics combine? In India they did. In India, humanism became a big weapon in the hands of freedom fighters against British imperialism, British regime, and that way humanism and politics are inseparable. The second question, can humanism be a kind of vision? Vision means a picture that you are inspired by, and a picture that you want to turn your reality into. That is possible. So being a humanist means being a dreamer. Being a humanist, being an idealist. Being a humanist means that you are combining all the people into a thread that will make you a force to reckon with for the fight against what you consider wrong. So all this is humanism, and this is a new trend. In the 19th century, this was raised to a level, but in the 20th century, this got a literary shape, and I thought that I'd be sharing this kind of a thing with you, with these people, plus many more in different languages, giving their might to the cause of what I say, the pursuance of truth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session on humanism in modern Indian writing. And dear friends, we believe that your feedbacks are important. So do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We will be meeting very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you.